Bruce Lee seemed like the fastest man on earth. He was invincible, unstoppable, a force of nature who changed the world with his hands and his philosophy. But the man his daughter knew was not the man on the posters. Shannon Lee has confessed that the earliest memories of her father are nothing like the myth the world created. Behind the fame was a man mistreated by those who claimed to support him. A man betrayed by powerful names he couldn't fight. Now, after decades of silence, his daughter is finally speaking. And what she has to say about her father will change how you see his death. The man behind the legend. Bruce Lee died at the age of 32, but more than 50 years later, his name still carries weight. His face is everywhere, on posters and t-shirts and murals painted by people who never saw him breathe. His words are quoted by athletes and actors and ordinary people trying to find motivation. He became something larger than life, a symbol of discipline and determination, and the belief that a person can transcend any limit placed upon them. But his daughter has lived with the part of him that never made it onto the posters. Not the legend, but the father. And for years, she watched the world reduce him to a stereotype, while the more difficult truths stayed hidden. Now, for the first time, she has decided to speak about what really happened behind the scenes. Bruce Lee was born Lee Junfan on November 27, 1940, in San Francisco, and the story of his birth was unusual. His father, Lee Hoi Chuen, was a star of Cantonese opera, traveling through the United States with his troupe when his wife went into labor. That meant Bruce entered the world far from the Hong Kong streets where he would later grow up. His mother, Grace Ho, came from a wealthy and mixed background, part Chinese and part European, which meant Bruce carried within him from birth an awareness of different worlds and different identities. His father's career put Bruce in front of cameras almost immediately. At just 3 months old, he appeared in a film called Golden Gate Girl, carried onto the set in his mother's arms, because that was simply what show business families did. Children appeared in their parents' productions. By the time he was a teenager, Bruce had already appeared in nearly 20 films, learning the rhythms of performance before he understood what performance really meant. But Hong Kong in the 1950s was not a gentle place to grow up. The city was still recovering from war and occupation, and the streets could be brutal. Bruce was small for his age, but he refused to back down from anyone. He fought constantly, not as a bully, but as someone who would not tolerate disrespect. His parents watched with growing alarm as their son accumulated enemies and incidents. They feared he would end up in serious trouble, maybe even prison. So they made a painful decision. They put him on a boat to America, hoping distance would give him a chance to reset. He arrived in San Francisco with almost nothing, then made his way to Seattle, where he enrolled at Edison Technical School to finish his education. To support himself, he took whatever work he could find, washing dishes in restaurants, waiting tables, and even teaching cha-cha dancing to earn a few extra dollars. Eventually, he enrolled at the University of Washington, where he chose to study philosophy. This decision surprised people then, and still surprises people now. But Bruce never saw a separation between the physical and the mental. He believed that fighting was not just about muscles. It was about understanding yourself, your opponent, and the space between you. To pay his way through school, he began teaching martial arts. He charged very little and welcomed anyone who wanted to learn, regardless of their race or background, which was unusual for the time. He called his approach Jeet Kune Do, not because he wanted to start a new style, but because he wanted to express a philosophy. The philosophy of adaptability, of flowing like water, of taking what works and discarding what does not. His first real breakthrough with American audiences came through a television show called The Green Hornet, which aired from 1966 to 1967. He played Kato, the sidekick who somehow always upstaged the hero. Viewers noticed and loved him, but Hollywood in the 1960s had very limited ideas about what an Asian actor could do, and those ideas did not include leading roles. He was offered parts as villains, as servants, and as the kind of stereotyped characters he refused to play. He turned them down again and again, believing that something better would eventually come. That something never arrived in America. So he made the difficult choice to return to Hong Kong, the place his parents had sent him away from years earlier. There, the reception was completely different. The films he made there, The Big Boss, Fist of Fury, and Way of the Dragon, turned him into the biggest movie star in Asia almost overnight. Just like that, he was the main attraction, the reason audiences packed theaters from Hong Kong to Singapore to Tokyo. Warner Brothers noticed the box office numbers. They saw dollar signs, and they proposed a collaboration. An American-produced martial arts film with a real budget and a Hong Kong star. That film was Enter the Dragon, and it was supposed to be his breakthrough, the moment he finally conquered the market that had rejected him for so long. However, he never saw it finished. On July 20th, 1973, Bruce Lee died at the age of 32. Enter the Dragon was released a few weeks later and became a massive global success, turning Bruce Lee into a legend he was not alive to witness. In the decades since, that legend has only grown. He is remembered as a pioneer who broke racial barriers in Hollywood. He is quoted as a philosopher who distilled ancient wisdom into simple, powerful truths. He is studied as a physical specimen who pushed the human body to its absolute limits. But while all of that is true, there is more. Behind the fame and the iconic image, Bruce Lee lived a life that was not always triumphant. He faced obstacles that had nothing to do with his talent. He was mistreated by people who claimed to be on his side. He was blocked, exploited, and dismissed by an industry that profited from his work, while refusing to give him what he deserved. His daughter Shannon knows this part of the story better than anyone, and after decades of silence, she has finally decided to tell it. Bruce Lee was mistreated. While the world built statues to Bruce Lee, the people who actually knew him watched something else happen. They watched his story get rewritten. They watched his struggles get erased. And they watched an industry that had rejected him during his life claim him as its own after his death. For decades, they mostly stayed quiet about it. But Shannon Lee has reached a point where silence no longer feels like an option. She has started speaking about the way her father was treated, both while he was alive and in the years since he died. When Bruce Lee returned to Hong Kong in the early 1970s, he did so because Hollywood had made it clear there was no place for him. He had pitched ideas, auditioned for roles, and demonstrated again and again that he had the talent and charisma to be a major star. But studios kept telling him the same thing. American audiences would not accept an Asian leading man. They would not buy tickets to see him carry a film. So they offered him the only parts they thought fit: villains and servants and caricatures, roles that reduced him to nothing but his ethnicity. The most painful example of this rejection involved a television series called Kung Fu. Bruce had developed the concept himself, a show about a martial artist traveling through the American West, using his philosophy and skills to navigate a world that did not understand him. He pitched it to Warner Brothers, believing it could be his breakthrough. However, the studio passed on him. They liked the idea well enough, but they gave the lead role to David Carradine, a white actor. Bruce watched someone else profit from his idea, playing a character built on his vision, while he remained on the outside looking in. The pay disparity between Bruce and his white counterparts was stark throughout his career. Even as his films in Hong Kong shattered box office records, even as Enter the Dragon became one of the most profitable films ever made, he was never compensated anywhere near what a white actor of his stature would have commanded. Studios saw his value as a performer, but they refused to translate that value into fair treatment. They wanted what he could do for them, but they did not want to give him what he deserved. That pattern did not stop with his death. If anything, it got worse. His image, his name, his very likeness became a commodity that generated millions of dollars, very little of which went to his family. Films were made using his footage. Merchandise was produced without permission. His philosophy was quoted and adapted and watered down by people who had never met him. The industry that had rejected him now profited endlessly from his legacy, and his family had almost no control over any of it. Shannon has spent decades fighting to reclaim that control. Through the Bruce Lee Foundation, she works to protect his image and ensure that his philosophy is presented authentically. But the fight has not been easy. Every time she thinks she has secured his legacy, something new emerges to distort it again. One of the most public battles came recently with Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. In that movie, Bruce Lee appears as a character, portrayed by an actor, in a scene that shows him being arrogant and easily defeated. Shannon did not stay silent about it. She wrote an open letter in The Hollywood Reporter, calling the portrayal irresponsible and damaging. She pointed out that Tarantino had done exactly what white Hollywood did to her father when he was alive, reducing him to a caricature, creating an impression that had nothing to do with who he really was. The scene, she argued, would shape how a new generation saw her father, and it would shape them wrong. The backlash to her comments was immediate. Some defended Tarantino, while some accused Shannon of being overly sensitive. But she stood by what she said, because she knows better than anyone what her father actually was. The fame that came to Bruce Lee was overwhelming even before he died. In Hong Kong, he could not walk down the street without being mobbed. Tabloids speculated constantly about his personal life, his health, and his relationships. His wife Linda and their two children, Brandon and Shannon, lived under a microscope, their every move watched and analyzed. The pressure was immense, but that pressure was nothing compared to what came after. When Bruce died, the attention did not stop. It intensified. The family lost a husband and father, but they gained a global obsession. Everyone wanted to know about him. Everyone wanted a piece of him. And not everyone who wanted a piece had good intentions. His image was stolen, his words were twisted, and his family was left to grieve in public while watching strangers profit from their loss. While the exploitation and mistreatment Bruce Lee endured are part of his story, there is something much darker that has followed his family across decades. Because even after Bruce's death, the tragedies did not stop. They kept coming. And eventually, people began to wonder if something more than bad luck was at work. Was the Lee family cursed? When Bruce Lee died in 1973, the world could not quite accept that it was simply an accident. A healthy 32-year-old man, at the peak of his physical powers, does not just go to sleep and never wake up. There had to be more to it. There had to be a reason. And when people cannot find a reason, they create one. So the theories began. The rumors spread. And over time, those rumors hardened into something darker. The idea that Bruce Lee's family was marked by something beyond ordinary misfortune, a curse. 20 years later, when his son Brandon died under circumstances that seemed almost impossibly similar, that idea took on a life of its own. But Shannon Lee has spent her life living with this narrative, and she wants people to understand something important. The curse makes for a good story, but it is not the truth. The day Bruce Lee died started like any other. He was in Hong Kong, working on a film, busy with the endless demands of being the biggest movie star in Asia. On July 20th, 1973, he visited the home of actress Betty Ting Pei to discuss a script. At some point, he complained of a headache, so she gave him a medication called Equagesic. He lay down to rest, and he never woke up. The official cause of death was cerebral edema, swelling of the brain. Medical examiners determined that he had an adverse reaction to the medication, a sensitivity that caused his brain to swell fatally. It was a tragedy, but it was not a mystery. The coroner's report was clear, yet from the moment the news broke, people refused to accept it. Some claimed he was murdered by triads, the organized crime syndicates operating in Hong Kong. The theory went that he had refused to pay protection money or had crossed the wrong people, and they had him eliminated. Others whispered about jealous rivals in the martial arts world, masters who resented his fame and used secret techniques to strike him down. The most exotic theory involved something called the dim mak, or the touch of death, a legendary martial arts ability that supposedly allowed a fighter to kill with a single strike, with death delayed for days or weeks, so no one would suspect. There were also rumors about Betty Ting Pei. Some suggested she had given him something more than a simple painkiller, either intentionally or by accident. Romantic scandal theories circulated, painting scenarios that had no basis in fact, but sold newspapers anyway. The speculation was endless, and none of it ever stopped. For 20 years, these theories remained just theories, stories told by fans and tabloids with no way to prove them. Then, in 1993, everything changed again. Brandon Lee was 28 years old, on the verge of his own breakthrough. He had his father's looks, his father's charisma, and his father's martial arts skill. He was starring in a film called The Crow, a dark superhero movie that was expected to launch him into the same stratosphere his father had occupied. On March 31, 1993, he was filming a scene that required his character to be shot. The prop gun used in the scene had malfunctioned earlier. A dummy bullet had become lodged in the barrel. Later, when a blank cartridge was fired, the force pushed that lodged bullet out of the gun and into Brandon's abdomen. He was rushed to the hospital. Surgeons worked for hours, but the damage was too severe. He died later that day, at the age of 28, the same age his father had been when he made Enter the Dragon. He died in a hospital, just as his father had, suddenly, tragically, and senselessly. The coincidence was too much for many people to process. Two men from the same family, both martial artists and both actors, were both cut down at the peak of their youth. It had to be more than chance. It had to be something else. The curse narrative, which had simmered for 2 decades, boiled over. People who had never met the Lees suddenly considered themselves experts on their fate. Documentaries were made. Books were written. The idea of a cursed family became part of the Bruce Lee mythology, as fixed in the public imagination as his films and his philosophy. But Shannon Lee has always rejected this theory. She has spoken about the pain of hearing strangers reduce her father and brother to characters in a horror story. She acknowledges that curiosity is natural. 2 deaths under unusual circumstances will always generate questions. But she points out that both deaths have official explanations supported by evidence. Bruce died from an allergic reaction to medication. Brandon died from a tragic accident on a film set. Neither death involved triads, nor curses, nor secret martial arts techniques. Still, the rumors have never fully stopped. In the decades since Brandon's death, new theories have emerged. Some people cannot let go of the idea that there is more to the Lee family than meets the eye. And Shannon has spent years confronting those rumors, correcting the record, and trying to pull the focus back to what really matters. The rumors that followed Bruce Lee. If you ask most people what they know about Bruce Lee, they will talk about his speed, his philosophy, and his films. But if you ask them what he was like as a person, many will hesitate, and then some will offer an answer that has nothing to do with the man his family knew. Some describe him as arrogant and cocky, and as someone who walked through life with a chip on his shoulder, ready to fight anyone who looked at him wrong. This image of Bruce Lee has persisted for decades, reinforced by stories from Hollywood insiders, and, more recently, by a famous film scene that portrayed him as a boastful braggart easily put in his place. Shannon Lee has heard this description of her father her entire life, and she wants to be very clear about something. It is wrong. The arrogance narrative started early. During his time in Hollywood, Bruce was often described by executives and colleagues as difficult, intense, or too proud. He refused to play the roles they offered him. He pushed back against their assumptions. He demanded to be treated as more than a stereotype. In an industry that expected Asian actors to be passive and grateful for any work they received, his assertiveness was read as aggression. His confidence was read as arrogance. He was not behaving the way they thought he should behave, so they labeled him. In Quentin Tarantino's film Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, Bruce appears in a scene where he boasts about his fighting abilities and then loses a fight to a stuntman. The scene is played for laughs. It presents Bruce as a cartoon, full of swagger and empty of substance. Shannon did not find it funny. She found it deeply disrespectful, not just to her father, but to the truth of who he was. She pointed out that her father's frustration with the industry was often misjudged as anger. Bruce believed deeply in himself because he had to. If he had waited for Hollywood to believe in him first, he would have waited forever. Those who actually knew him describe someone very different from the arrogant caricature. His students spoke about his patience, his generosity, and his willingness to share knowledge with anyone who was serious about learning. He was a man who could be intense in his work, but warm in his personal life. The confusion between confidence and arrogance is not accidental. It grows out of cultural bias, both then and now. In the 1960s and 70s, Hollywood had two boxes for Asian men. They could be submissive, the quiet servant who never causes trouble. Or they could be aggressive, the inscrutable villain who threatens the hero. And Bruce refused both boxes. He was neither submissive nor villainous. He was simply himself, a man who knew what he was worth and refused to accept less. Because the industry had no category for that, they labeled him difficult, and they called him arrogant. The media played its part too. Tabloids then and films now understand that drama sells. A humble philosopher who spent his life studying and teaching does not generate as many headlines as a hot-headed fighter who thought he was better than everyone else. The distortion served a purpose. It made for better stories. But it also created a false impression that has proven nearly impossible to correct. Shannon has spent years trying to correct it. Through the Bruce Lee Foundation, through interviews, and through her book In My Own Process, she emphasizes her father's real character. He was disciplined, not arrogant. He was humble before the vastness of what he did not yet know. A true student of philosophy, who understood that real knowledge reveals how much you have yet to learn. He respected his teachers, his students, and his peers. And while Shannon has worked to protect his legacy, she has also worked to understand him. And in that work, she has discovered things about him that never make it into the documentaries. How Shannon remembers her father. The world remembers Bruce Lee as a fighter, a philosopher, and a legend carved in stone and bronze. But his daughter remembers something else. She remembers how he felt. Not what he said, or what he achieved, but the feeling of being held by him, of being seen by him, and of being safe in his presence. Those memories belong only to her, and they are the truth she carries closest to her heart. Shannon was 4 years old when her father died. 4 years old is too young to hold on to specific conversations or remember the details of everyday moments. But it is not too young to feel. And what she felt from him, she has carried across an entire lifetime. She felt warmth. She felt attention. She felt that when he was with her, he was truly with her, not distracted by the demands of fame or the pressures of his work. He made her feel valued. He made her feel loved. And he made her feel that she mattered in a way that had nothing to do with who the world thought he was. Playfulness was a defining part of his presence at home. He was not the intense, focused fighter the public saw on screen. He was a father who laughed with his children, who found joy in simple moments, who understood that discipline and love could exist together. He taught his children, but he also played with them. He guided them, but he also let them be. That balance between strength and softness, between teaching and simply being present, is something Shannon has carried into her own life. Years later, she wrote a memoir called Be Water, My Friend. The title comes from his most famous philosophy, the idea that water can flow or crash and adapt to any container yet still wear away stone. But the book is not just about martial arts. It is about how to live. Shannon uses her father's teachings as a framework for navigating the world, for facing challenges, and for understanding herself. She writes about lessons he passed on, not always through words, but through the way he lived. He believed that life is not a competition, that we are not here to defeat others, but to create alongside them. He believed that we should not live according to other people's expectations, that authenticity matters more than approval. She also remembers the day he died, not the moment itself, but what came after. The funeral in Hong Kong was pure chaos. Thousands of mourners filling the streets, the media pushing for photographs, and the whole world focused on the legend they had lost. Inside that storm, Shannon felt something else. She felt shut down, protected somehow, held in a quiet space while everything around her roared. She was too young to process death, too young to understand that her father was gone forever. But she was not too young to feel that even in that moment, she was cared for. The sense of safety he gave her did not disappear when he died. It stayed through the years of watching his legacy be distorted, through the tragedy of losing her brother, and through the endless fight to protect his name. She has said that his presence was so strong during her early years that she still feels guided by it. When she faces difficult decisions, when she wonders what he would think, when she needs to feel grounded, she reaches back to those early memories, and they are enough. Her work now is dedicated to sharing the real Bruce Lee, not the legend, but the man. Through documentaries, through the foundation, and through her writing, she tries to show the side of him the public never saw. The warmth, the humor, the attention he gave to his children, the way he could be both a fierce martial artist and a tender father. She wants people to understand that he was not just an icon. He was a person. And the person was even more remarkable than the icon. The world will always have its own ideas about Bruce Lee. But Shannon has something the world does not have. She has the memory of how he felt. And that memory, private and precious, and entirely hers, is the truth she holds on to. What's your favorite memory of Bruce Lee? Drop your answers in the comments below. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to the channel. Thank you for watching, and if you enjoy this video, please click on the next one on your screen.